Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of D Time with David Jackson. Today's episode is entitled Living in the World. And as I was thinking of what to kind of cover in this episode, I thought of the scripture in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14 through 15. It's where Paul talks to the church about not being yoked with unbelievers and being holy. And I thought of this as an interesting topic, that I think that most people, most Christians struggle with is, how to be in the world but not be of the world. And, not intermixing light with darkness. And as a young Christian, this is something that really challenged me, especially, you being young and going through, many things that young people go through, and then having the feeling that all of a sudden, the world that you once lived in, you don't you don't belong in anymore. And that can be a jarring experience for a lot of people. And so when thinking of this scripture and thinking of this topic, I want to just kind of share my thoughts and insights on this area. And one thing that the Bible makes clear is that there's no gray areas. There's black, white, there's light or darkness. There's no gray area for God. And that can be a tough thing to come to terms with. But in reality, it's actually a good thing that there's no gray area. One of the things that frustrates me the most is, not being certain of things. When things are ambiguous, my wife can tell you, it doesn't help me. And so I like things being, black or white and not having any gray area. And with God, it's the same thing. We're called to be holy, yet live in a world that, in a lot of aspects and a lot of respects, you know, doesn't abide by the same rules. So, what is it that we do? I think the thing that to remember is that, you know being yoked means that you're influenced, that you're influenced by the other person. A yoke is a term for farming. When you yoke together oxen, they're yoked together, they work together, headed in the same direction. One can't go one way and the other. They're stuck, and they're influenced by each other. And so in Christianity, it's the same thing. Who are you influenced by? Who are the people that influence your decision making? Who are those people that you're yoked with? And that's where I think the distinction needs to be made. If as I'm saying this, there's probably people that you're thinking of. Hey, I know there's some people that I don't need to be influenced by, and we have a great way ourselves of kind of knowing what that line is, and knowing what's real. And so that's the question. That's the challenge for those listening. Who are you influenced by? If you're influenced by the wrong people, you need to get away from those people. And we know what's right and wrong. And so when it comes with living in the world as a Christian, we just need to be influenced by the right people. And one of the things that I'll probably harp on a lot or talk about a lot during the length of this podcast is surrounding yourself with the right people. Having a good team, a solid group of people, individuals to keep you accountable, to keep you on the right path, and to influence you in the right ways. If we're going to be, in the light, as the Bible talks about, we need to be influenced by people that are going to be in the light as well. And so, my challenge for all the listeners out there is just think about who the people in your lives that influence you, that influence your decisions, influence your actions. Not mind control, but you know what I'm talking about. Who influences your decision? And if we want to be on the light side, we need to be influenced by people that are also trying to do the same thing. Because, again, like I said earlier, there's no gray areas. So that's it for the first part. A little blurb for you guys. I'm really excited to for you guys to hear from my guest in part two, Delaney Julian. She's going to share her insights on this topic, and I'm excited to not only hear from her, but excited for you guys to hear from her as well. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Peace. All right, welcome to the second part of D Time. I have a very special guest with me today, Delaney Julie. Thank you, Delaney, for taking the time out to join me on the chat.
Oh, thank you. It's a privilege.
Awesome. So, for those that are listening, Delaney, why don't you take a couple minutes to just share about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm 25 years old, living in Seattle, Washington, and I got a bachelor's degree in English a couple years ago, and I've been living in Seattle for about 3 years now. And my goals for the future are I'm going to go back to school and get a master's pretty soon in teaching. So I'm really interested in working with children, and I really want to be a school teacher. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Awesome. So today's episode is kind of about living in the world. You know, as a Christian, that can be challenging, and I kind of spoke a little bit about that in the first part. But from your experience, from your viewpoint, why do you think Christians have a hard time or a challenge being in the world but not in it?
Not of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a huge topic right now, especially in America, because I think so many people claim to be Christian, but just looking at the state of America right now, I feel like it's very difficult to determine who really lives it out and who just says it. I think for me, like, that was something I fell into a lot, like growing up and coming into college. I think I definitely called myself a Christian, but I looked just like everybody else. So I think once I committed to actually living it out, being in the world but not being of it was, I feel like, definitely more of a challenge, because so much of today is like just fitting in with everybody else. It's like, who has, who looks the best, who has the best relationship, who has the best job. And, so I feel like being a Christian and trying to be a good person in a sense, like, trying to be morally good, but also holding to the standard of the Bible, it can make people almost like I feel like I'm treated as a judgmental person sometimes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, given that, I think, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of struggling with that aspect? You mentioned, in college and dealing with that challenge. What advice would you give to someone kind of going through the same thing?
Yeah, I think the biggest struggle is just not being a people pleaser. What I mean by that is, when you're in the world and of the world, it's like you just, you don't want to rub any or rustle any feathers, really. You kind of just want to be like everybody else. Because, standing up for your convictions as a Christian, like, being somewhere where everybody wants to go drinking, or, being in a group where everybody's gossiping, that can even happen for me nowadays at work, and the temptation is like, oh, like, should I just, be a part of this? Like, they're going to think I'm judging them if I walk away. But, thinking about the kind of character Jesus had, he just wasn't a people pleaser. If he saw people, doing things and they claimed to be Christians, he would call them out on it. He was loving about it, but he would tell people, hey, like, this isn't right. And so I think, I think for someone struggling with that, it's not being so much focused on what people think, but about what God thinks.
Oh, yeah. It's a great point. So you kind of mentioned a little bit as far as, like, challenging situations where you can kind of feel pulled into, certain situations. What would you say was the most challenging situation where you found yourself, wanting to, or not wanting to, or being pulled by the world?
I think with family, it's the hardest.
Yeah.
Especially not living at home. I live in a different state now. I used to live in California with my family, and so now when I do go home, I think that's really the hardest place of, like, temptation to not be a people pleaser, because I love my family so much and I don't get to see them. that often. I maybe see them like once or twice a year, which I'm grateful for, but it's like when I'm there, it's like trying to be really loving and, you know, trying to just spend time with them. But also it's like facing the confrontation of like standing up for my convictions, which not all of them agree with what I believe in. So I think that's definitely probably the toughest life situation for me.
Yeah. Wow, that's really timely. So, at the time of this recording, we're about to enter, you know, the Thanksgiving Christmas holiday, you know, which a lot of people, Christians, find themselves being back at home. So, what are some tips or things that have helped you when being with family to kind of help, you know, lessen that pull? You know, what are your go-to things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest temptation that I've run into is being a Pharisee to my family, which the Pharisees at the time of Jesus' time were really hypocritical and super religious and would just call people out on, you know, their sin, and they just weren't known for their love. And I think that in the past I can be like that towards my family, where I'm like, you guys, you know, claim to believe in God, but, you know, point out this and this and this, or, you know, I can act like super religious. So I think what I've found to be a better solution to that is just to be really loving and to be someone who's a good listener, and just seeking to understand where they're at, whether it's like my cousin or my aunt or uncle, and just asking more questions like, you know, let's talk about you, like, let's talk about your heart, you know, how can I serve you? That's another thing I think that softens my family's heart, is when I just, you know, go out of my way to clean something or, you know, cook for them, or, you know, just not necessarily making it about like, you need to change because of this, but more winning them over, I think is definitely more effective.
Yeah, that's great. So one question that I ask everyone that I sit down with is, what's the best piece of advice that you've gotten or received? And if you don't have a top one, you know, what's one nugget that you could share?
I actually, the first thing that I thought of when I saw this question was, it made me think of my fiance, Rich. Well, he's my fiance now. When this debuts, I don't know if we'll be married or not, but he once told me that I should embrace my weaknesses. And I felt like that was weird at first, because I was like, why would I want to, you know, love the things that I'm weak at? You know, why would I want to embrace that part of myself? But what I've been learning is that, you know, the more weaknesses that I have, or the more that things make me struggle, the more I have to rely on God in order to overcome those things. You know, so anytime there's something hard that I'm dealing with in life, it's like I need to train myself, like, okay, this is making me rely on God because I can't fix it myself, you know. So that was one piece of advice that I am so grateful for, and something that I'm going to hold on to for a long time.
Awesome. Rich, if you're listening, great advice, bro. Awesome. Delaney, thank you so much for sharing your insights and again, taking the time out. If you have for those listening, if you have any thoughts or comments on this subject, feel free to, you know, leave a message in the comments or send us an email at dtimepodcast@gmail.com. Delaney, thanks again. Side note, Delaney and I are fellow Harry Potter fans, and so I've always being able to geek out over Harry Potter and things like that. So thanks, sis, and thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Awesome.